The Treasury and the Human Research Council will be launching the Spatial Economic Activity Data today. It addresses the data gap around the performance of cities and the wider economic geography of the country by leveraging tax and other administrative data sources. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana said to deliver the keynote address. So let's unpack exactly what this means, perhaps in simpler terms, bringing Dr. Justin Visagie from the Human Sciences Research Council joining us via our video link this morning. It's great to have you on the program, Doc. Thanks very much indeed for making time for the AM report. So it's called Spatial Economic Activity Data. Perhaps let's begin there. What is it and why is it important?
Sure, Ayanda. Thanks for having me on the show. Well, geography really matters for economic development. I mean, we have an intuitive sense of that. Where you grow up, it very much determines, what sort of opportunities present themselves. So South Africa has a particular legacy of apartheid spatial planning, and we still see that prevalent in our cities and our economic development today. So space really matters for the economy, and so getting better data around spatial economic activity is a first step in trying to improve our urban planning and make our cities more productive and more livable places.
And I suppose to do that, you also have you must have a good sense of migration patterns on the country, right? Because that's also quite a major economic driver.
Yes. So there's an economic logic to cities. If you look at any country across the world, economic activity isn't spread over thinly like butter on your toast. It's very lumpy, and that's because people clustering together can get certain benefits in terms of shared infrastructure, bigger local markets, and also learning from each other. So there's a sort of fundamental dynamic to the way the economy works, which is spatial, and particularly around urbanization. And yet, it's also very possible to get big, sprawling cities which aren't productive, right? Because you need the investment to make sure that people are connected and that our urban spaces can function efficiently. So it's really important for us to be looking at the country and looking at the economy of the country through an economic geography lens. Right. And so that's what the Spatial Economic Activity Data program is all about. For the first time, we're starting to get better quality information, spatial information, which will enable cities to do better economic planning.
Fascinating. So what do we know currently about where the bulk of economic activity is taking place in the country? I mean, typically, Joburg is referred to as the city of gold. In fact, we often speak about it being the economic hub. Is that still the case?
Yes, thank you. So it can be very expensive to collect this sort of information. If you think about the census, which some of your viewers might be familiar with, Stats SA spend billions of rands in trying to collect very detailed spatial information about households. But we haven't had anything equivalent when it comes to the economy. So we don't know where firms are located. We don't know where jobs are located and in what particular sectors. And there's a huge cost factor to getting that sort of information. So what this project is about is actually an innovation in the line of big data and the fourth industrial revolution, where you can use the fact that people are filling out their tax records to then mine and glean information about where economic activity is happening. And what you do find when you look carefully at the data is the central role of cities in South Africa's economic development. So to give you a sense of it, in the metros, in the Gauteng metros in particular, there's one person working for every three persons. So there's one formal job supporting every three people in the Gauteng metros. But if you go and look at mostly rural municipalities or small town municipalities, that ratio changes to one person working for every 15. So you can see the pressures that people face in the rest of the country, and that the bulk of economic activity remains concentrated in our cities. And so getting our cities to work as the sort of engines of economic development is a high priority. And so we've needed better economic data to do so.
Sure. That's quite insightful. How does governance factor into this equation, especially because you mentioned the idea of cities needing to work for us to at least have better ratios?
definitely it's a critical issue. I mean, you have to get the basics to work well and fix the fundamentals, and that's a high priority in South Africa at the moment. Load shedding is really crippling the economy, and that is about getting our water, our lights, our services to work. But of course, cities present the opportunity to do so far more efficiently, and that's because if people are all clustered and grouped together, it means that it's easier to share that investment across a group of people spatially. Whereas if people are spread all over the place in sort of rural areas, it can be very difficult to reach them. So cities present the opportunity to deliver services more effectively. But often there needs to be a more positive mindset around the role of cities in economic development. Yes, there are big challenges. We can just think of the growth of informal settlements, migration, and the pressures that are placed upon cities. But this is part of the opportunity that all countries in the world, as they urbanize, they have the potential to become more developed, and that's because of these sort of fundamental economic dynamics going on. So yes, we need to focus on the fundamentals, we need to fix the basics, and we need our cities to work more effectively if our national economy is going to start to perform better.
Yeah. Does this data shed any light on the quality of life lived, though? I mean, just anecdotally speaking, I suppose, depending on your own disposition, some people might enjoy a much slower-paced lifestyle, which feels slightly more wholesome, whereas other people resonate perhaps with the hustle and bustle of being in a city. And I suppose it's quite difficult to objectively say, even through using data like this, whether or not the quality of life is better in any context.
Yes, I mean, I think it's important to bear in mind that there are connections between all of these different places and spaces, right? So the hustle and bustle in the CBD connects through to the sort of more green, leafy, suburban life, which connects through to people living in townships on the peripheries, and which connects through to the rural hinterland. So it's important not just to frame the discussion as cities versus rural areas, when actually our cities doing well inevitably mean that our rural areas will also perform better. So all of these places and spaces and communities are connected to one another. But this particular initiative is around the fact that we haven't had good economic data about spatially what's been happening in South Africa. So the census has given us a clearer picture of quality of life for households, but we haven't had the equivalent in terms of which jobs are available in the city of Johannesburg and within the CBD, which sectors have performed better or worse, what has been the response since COVID. A number of basic questions we've been unable to answer simply because we haven't had economic data available. So this initiative really is a breakthrough for the country, because by mining tax records, we're able to create a sustainable or renewable source of information which can hopefully lead to better economic planning in the medium and long run.
Fascinating stuff. Dr. Justin Visagie, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Really insightful conversation.